Hello and welcome to episode 8 of Think Big with Michael Zellner. All positive, no politics. My guest today is Pete Pranica. Pete happens to be the Memphis Grizzlies TV broadcaster on Bally Sports Southeast. He also calls games on TNT and NBA television. He was named the Sportscaster of the Year in Tennessee by the NSMA Tennessee Sportscaster of the Year in 2017. And he also has a podcast called the Grizz Weekly Grind Podcast that airs every Monday and Thursday. Welcome to the show, Pete.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Thank you very much. Pete, tell us something interesting about yourself that most people don't know.
There are a lot of things. My first real radio job outside of student radio was at a small station in northern Wisconsin. I was not a morning person at the time, but yet I had to get up and turn the transmitter on at 5 a.m. And then I would do everything from spin records to read accident reports and obituaries, school lunch menus. Wow. And for a half hour every weekday morning, I literally called bingo on the radio.
Wow. How did you do that?
There was a grocery store called Roy's Red Owl, and every time you bought groceries, you got a bingo card. And every morning between 9 and 9:30, I had the old-fashioned cage with the wooden balls, and you spin around, and then one would roll out.
Yeah.
And I had the microphone open so that people could hear that I just wasn't making this stuff up, that I actually was spinning the cage around. And you kept calling until somebody out in the listening audience got blackout bingo. And once they called bingo, they called the front desk, the receptionist confirmed the numbers and all that. But the trick of it was I had to be off in 30 minutes because we had a network radio show right after that. So I had to be precisely at 30 minutes. And, you had to keep the show moving. And right. There were some people would call in saying, "You're calling too fast." I don't know if they had 10 or 20 cards or whatever, but yeah. And the other kind of funny thing about that tenure is I would read the school lunch menus. Kids wanted to know what they were going to have for lunch that day. And it's kind of dry to just read it with nothing behind you. So I got a copy of the Linus and Lucy, the Peanuts theme, and played that in the background. I actually had a mother complain that I was playing music behind the school lunch menu. So tales from small market radio.
That's really funny. Thank you for sharing that. Your broadcasting career started when you were a teenager in high school, and you talked about the little radio station, the 10-watt radio station, WGBP, I believe. And You DJ during your study hall period. You called football and basketball games on the weekend. How did all that come about and get started?
It was just one of those things that I'd always been interested in sports. I realized that, at 5'8", and, I was a really skinny kid. You'd never guess it now, but I was a real skinny kid. Didn't have a whole lot of athletic ability. So if I wanted to be involved in sports, it was going to have to be in some other capacity. Growing up and in the country, there weren't neighbor kids to play with. So there were a lot of nights spent listening to Milwaukee Bucks games on the radio. Sometimes we'd go to Packer games because we had tickets, but then there were other times where you would listen to the radio broadcasts, and it just captured my imagination. So it was something I always wanted to do. And so when the opportunity came up in high school to start to do some play-by-play, jumped all over it and was very involved in it. I mean, we did everything from soliciting the underwriting because we couldn't sell advertising. We were in the educational portion of the FM band. So you'd get underwriting. Some alumni of the school would throw us $100 and we could pay for the phone lines. And so we could travel to other schools and do the football games and the basketball games and get them back to Green Bay. And the biggest thrill really was at that point in time, the state of Wisconsin, they differentiated. They had two different athletic associations, one for public schools and one for private schools. And our school was a Catholic boys only school, and no team outside of the city of Milwaukee had ever won that association's basketball tournament, except for my senior year in high school. And so here I am, all of about 15, 16 years old, and I'm sitting courtside at the old Milwaukee Arena calling a state championship game from my high school, and
That's so cool.
that was very cool. And the other thing too that some people may or may not know is that Kevin Harlan of CBS and TNT and Westwood One Radio also got his start at WGBP. Kevin is a few years older than I am, so our paths didn't cross while I was there.
Right.
But that's how we both got started. He went to the University of Kansas. I went to Notre Dame, and we were both able to make our dreams come true.
Wow. So you talk about, Wisconsin. I know you grew up in Wisconsin and went to Notre Dame, and then you worked at that, small station, I believe in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin.
Right.
You were always looking for that opportunity in broadcasting full time. And, I'm a big believer that you need to be prepared for that big break when it comes your way. And you got your first big shot with the Detroit Pistons. How did that happen and come about?
Well, after at Notre Dame, I had done a lot of student radio. So I had some, I thought, pretty good tapes. And the WDOR experience of getting up early in the morning and then calling basketball games at night and, for $5 an hour, it wore kind of thin living on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And the University of Notre Dame's Alumni Association called me and they said, "We remember you being on student radio, writing for the newspaper. We need somebody to travel the country and to talk about Notre Dame." I mean, this is 1987. This is the pre-internet era.
Right.
And so Notre Dame thought it would be good to have people that would travel around the country. Notre Dame has about 200 alumni clubs around the country.
I didn't know
And
that.
in fact, one of the best for its size is in Memphis, Tennessee. So they were offering me a salary. They were offering me a chance to, go back to college and to travel the country on their dime. And so it's like, okay, I'm in. Maybe this broadcasting thing is not going to work out, but we'll see. This just was something that was, to me, a little bit more stable, and it was going to be a lot of fun because I get to go to all the football games, home and away, which was nice. And as it turned out, one of my duties was to play in alumni golf outings. One such outing was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and the president of the club said, "Hey, I know George Blaha, the voice of the Detroit Pistons, really well. Maybe you two guys should talk." And so he gave me George's number, and I called George and I said, "Hey, look, I'm working for the university. I want to get into the business. It's been really, really hard." Because in those days, program directors would say, "Well, yeah, you made tapes, but they were at student radio, so they don't count."
Right.
Okay. And George said, he said, the first thing he said was, "You know how many tapes I get?" And I was like, "Yes, I know you get a lot, but I'm just asking I'm not asking for a job. I'm just asking for a critique." And he said, "Well, you're a Notre Dame guy, so I'll listen to your tape." So he listens to the tape. A couple of weeks later, he calls me back and he says, "This is really good." He said, "You're as good as a lot of people in the NBA right now." And I said, "Thank you very much. But I need an opportunity." And George at that time, and still to this day, does Michigan State football. And so he would miss some Pistons games. His backup, Mark Champion, at the time, was doing Detroit Lions football. So there would be fall Saturdays where both of them would be unavailable and they needed somebody. And I became that somebody. So I remember the very first NBA game that I did for real was an exhibition game. It was at Sky Dome in Toronto before the Raptors were even in the league. And it was a big NBA-wide event. Detroit was playing Utah, and I think Cleveland was playing Boston. So they had this doubleheader, and I was calling, obviously, the Pistons game. The night before, this is a big NBA event. I get to meet David Stern. So, I mean, there's your welcome to the NBA moment. So that's how it all got started. And George gave my tape to his boss, a fellow by the name of Harry Hutt, who passed away sadly earlier this year. Harry then went on to Portland and then hired me in Portland, and then I made the transition to Memphis. So that's how I got into the NBA, and that's how the networking and the Notre Dame network got me to a place where I could take advantage of that.
After you talked about after working with the Pistons, I know you were in Portland for about 5 years, and then you came to the Grizzlies. Former Grizzly great announcer Don Poyer played a big part in you being here, and you called Don one of the classiest and best human beings you ever had the privilege to be around. What made that friendship so special to you?
Well, I think it was the start of the friendship, really, because I was at this time, so this would have been 97, I think. the Grizzlies were still in Vancouver. And I had left Notre Dame and I was working for a travel firm as a writer. I was writing travel brochures because I'd kind of gone as far as I could at Notre Dame, and it was an opportunity to move to Chicago, and it was just time for a change. And this Harry Hutt fellow who had hired me to do the games in Detroit, now was in Portland, calls me one night at my condo in Chicago, and he says, "Hey, can you get your butt out to Portland tomorrow night?" I'm like, why? He says, "Well, the Vancouver Grizzlies radio announcer has lost his voice and they have no backup. They don't know what to do. So if you can get out here to Portland, you can call Vancouver radio against the Portland Trail Blazers at the Rose Garden." He said, "I know it's not a full-time job, but it's an opportunity. You can get a more current tape." I'm like, okay, fine. So I go online and I get the last seat on a Southwest flight that, this is no exaggeration, went Chicago Midway to Kansas City, to Los Angeles, to Oakland, to Portland, and I never changed planes. That was the route of the flight. And at every stop, the flight attendants would come by and say, "Are you sure you're not supposed to get off?" I said, "No, believe it or not, I'm going all the way to Portland." So I think I left Chicago like at 6 a.m. I get to Portland about 3 p.m, check into the Grizzlies hotel and go to the arena, and did as much prep as I could, which in those days, it was really hard, but got what I could done. And I get to the arena and I meet Don, and Don has completely lost his voice, where it is barely a croak. And Don insisted on sitting at the scorer's table with us. And by us, I mean Jay Triano was the color analyst at the time, now an assistant coach in the NBA. And Don insisted, coming out of every break, that he introduce me as his fill-in for the night. And of course, Don had no voice. And bless his heart, Don mispronounced my name every single time coming out of break. And so he's there and, do the game. And it's a whirlwind, of course. And, you go back. And then, of course, I got the job a couple of years later with the Trailblazers. And so then every time the Grizzlies and Blazers played, Don and I would always have a good laugh about that night. And when the reason that I left Portland was Paul Allen at the time was losing about $100 million a year. And they cut 88 employees. And because my salary was at the high end, I was expendable, I was let go. And so after a year out of the league, I had applied here in Memphis to be the radio announcer, because Matt Devlin, who had been doing TV, was moving on to Charlotte. Don was going to be moved over to TV, and they needed somebody to do radio for the games that were not on TV. That was the job for which I applied. And I found out later, after I had gotten the job, Don was one of the first people to call me after I had accepted the offer. And they said to me, they said, "Don, we've got this guy, and Pete Pranica. These are the guys that we're looking at. Do you have any input? Do you have any preference?" And Don said, "I will always go back to that night in Portland." He kind of parachuted in and did the game. He was a good guy. We always had a good laugh about it. And Don said, "If I'm going to be traveling with anybody as a fellow broadcaster for 82 games, this is the guy I want to be with, because I think he's a good broadcaster and he's a good human being." And I think it was part of Don's approval that may have helped me get the job. So I'm eternally grateful to Don. When I got here in the fall of 2004, I was here by myself. Don and his wife, Barb, were always on the phone. And, every once in a while I'd get this phone call from Don, and that big baritone's like, "Hey, you're coming over for dinner tonight. We're cooking out." And that was it. And Don and Barb, along with Scotty McCullough, who was the head athletic trainer at the time, now with Toronto, and some other folks, the team physician, we would all gather. And the Poyer household, that first Thanksgiving, people that didn't have family or couldn't get to their family, we had Thanksgiving at the Poyers. That's the kind of people Don and Barb Poyer were and are. And I stay in touch with Barb, and I'm honored to be on the selection committee for choosing the recipient of the Don Poyer Scholarship. So, Don had a massive influence, and I think he's a big reason why I'm here.
Right about the same time that you started with the Grizzlies, you had the opportunity to work with NBC in the 2004 Olympics, and it was led by Dick Ebersole, and some of the all-time great broadcasters were on that team, including Bob Costas and Jim Lampley and others. That's really awesome. Tell us about that, please.
That was crazy because the year that I was out of the NBA, one of my close friends, in fact, had been the producer for Blazers telecast, had moved on to ESPN. And she called me and she said, look, I know that you really want to be doing games. You want to have the microphone. She said, but would you consider being a statistician for some of our telecasts? Okay, sure. So I did a lot of WNBA telecasts, but I also got to do an NBA preseason game as Mike Breen's statistician. And at that point, Mike was doing the Olympics for NBC, and I'd known Mike obviously, through my time with the Blazers, and asked him. I said, "Do you think that NBC has everybody they need for Athens?" And he said, "Yeah, I think they do." He said, "But I think you really ought to, send a tape to Jim Bell, who at that point was making the talent decisions, and who also, ironically, coincidentally, was producing Notre Dame football on NBC." So I had sent Jim a tape, and he said, we got everybody, but, we're going to keep the tape around just in case. And a few months later, I think this was probably maybe like June of 2004, Molly Solomon, who was now in charge of the talent decisions, calls me up and says, "I've got the easiest question for you to answer ever. Would you be willing to come to Athens and work for NBC?" Like, you got to be kidding me. And the funny story, and you bring up Dick Ebersole, is when I did the reel to send to NBC, okay, I had done the NBA, I had done the Seattle Seahawks preseason game, so I had NFL experience. I had done some of this high profile stuff, but I had also done high school swimming and diving, high school volleyball, indoor soccer on a fill-in basis in Detroit. So I had some of these kind of more offbeat sports, and that's what I put on my demo reel, because Dick Ebersole was not going to hire me to do the men's Olympic basketball competition. That was Mike Breen. That's fine. So I was like, well, I'm going to give you something else so that you can see that I'm versatile, because basically that's how I was going to find my way in, by taking the sports that nobody else wanted or nobody else had been assigned. And so that's the tape I sent in. And after I had agreed and, was on my way to Athens, Molly Solomon says, "I got to tell you a story." She says, and also remember too, the political climate in 2004. It's the first Olympics after 9/11. Right. And a lot of broadcasters were reading that this could be a terrorist target. So a lot of broadcasters said, you know what, it's not worth it. I'm not going to Athens. There could be a terrorist attack. I'm not going to put myself in harm's way. That's ultimately why there was an opening for me to go. And so I get to Athens, and the first person I run into, of course, is Dick Ebersole. "Hi, Mr. Ebersole. Thank you for the opportunity." That was about all I could manage at that point. And Molly tells me the story. She says, "So we know that we need to find somebody that we can rely on." And at that point, Steve Snapper Jones, my broadcast partner in Portland, was doing the NBA on NBC. So they reached out to him, and Snapper said, "He's a quality guy. He'll work really hard for you. He'll do a good job." So Dick Ebersole and Molly Solomon are sitting on a sofa, and they pop in the cassette, and they see me doing indoor soccer and swimming and diving and volleyball. And I don't know what else I put on that reel. And Dick Ebersole turns to Molly and says, "Well, number one, I love his voice. And number two, anybody that has the guts," he used different words, but I'll use guts, "to send me a reel with this instead of his high profile stuff, I like this guy's chutzpah, so definitely we need to hire him." And so, yeah, so that's how it all came about. And the untold story is that I was working for the travel firm at the time, I was going to need a month off of work to go work for NBC. And so I went to the husband and wife, it was their company, privately owned. And I said, look, here's the deal. NBC has offered me an opportunity to go to Athens. I will take a month without pay. Our production manager can handle the printing of the brochures. Everything's written, everything's in good shape. He can handle it for a month. I just need to do this. And they said no. They said, we will not let you go. And I said, look, you can tell your clients our VP of marketing is doing the Olympics for NBC. Wouldn't this be great for the company and for its visibility? And they didn't see it that way. And I had also been interviewing with the Grizzlies at this time, but the offer hadn't come across. So I had to make a decision. Do I turn down NBC and stay with my travel job, or do I quit my job, take a 1-month gig with NBC, and I have nothing after that I know of? Well, wouldn't you know, what do they say? Leap and the net will appear.
Right.
Before I had gone to Athens, my agent had said, look, I know Randy Stevens, who was running broadcasting for the Grizzlies at the time. I know him really well. I've worked with him. I think you need to initiate a meeting with him. They've got your resume, they've got your reel, but I think you need to go and sit down and meet with him, because once you go to Athens, it could be out of sight, out of mind. So on my own dime, I flew here to Memphis. We had lunch. And the funny thing was, the first question out of his mouth was, do you yell at officials? Because that was Don's specialty. So that was kind of a trick question right off the bat. So I had the interview and I thought it went well. And but I'm in Athens. So I made the decision. I'm going to do the Olympic Games for NBC. After that, I don't know. I could be unemployed. If I don't get the Grizzlies job, I'm out of luck, and I'm going to have to find something else to do. And wouldn't you know, I would get a phone call about 6 a.m. Athens time, which was about 10 p.m. back in the States, that I was being offered the radio job for the Memphis Grizzlies. So, and ironically, the guy who directs Grizzlies telecasts, Tom Hewitt, was there at the Olympics with me, just literally down the hall from me, producing field hockey. So it was just really a crazy, crazy story. Makes a pretty good reality show.
Best decision you ever made. One of them, at least.
It really was. And my wife at the time were taking our nephew to Washington, D.C. because he had never been there. And we had always kind of trusted his judgment. And we said, all right, Jimmy, what would you do? He's like, well, you go to the Olympics, of course. And like, okay, if he feels that strongly about it, I'm going to go. And I really don't think that there was much of a decision to be made there, honestly. But you pursue your dream, and like I said, you've seen that old adage, leap and the net will appear. So I leapt, and thank goodness the net did appear, and I've been in Memphis ever since.
Calling a basketball game isn't just, showing up 30 minutes before the start of a game and going on TV or radio. You spend hours preparing for the game. What is the Mini Hubie?
The Mini Hubie, okay. Years ago when Hubie Brown was doing Miami Heat telecasts, he worked with Ted Ballard, the producer, to come up with a one sheet of stats that Hubie felt were important. And I was introduced to this, I think when I was in Portland. ESPN had a version of it. Stats Inc., who was the stats provider at the time, they had a version of it. And so, I mean, it's 8.5 by 11. I mean, it's a full-size spreadsheet, and there's a lot of information on it. To scan it in the middle of the game sometimes is a little tough. And so I created an index card where I condensed that, the 100 or so stats there, down to maybe 25% of that for quicker reference. But that's something that I've done. people ask me how much time you prepare. Roughly, it's about 3 hours for every hour you're on the air. And that's minimum. And it doesn't take into account the times you're sitting around on an off night watching NBA League Pass, or talking with assistant coaches, or talking with scouts, or talking with other broadcasters. So, there's a lot that goes into it. One of the compliments that I enjoy the most is when a scout comes to us and says, we don't listen to most of the telecasts. We watch to get, the plays down, but we actually listen to you and Brevin because you actually give really good information. And yet at the same time, I've heard from people who were not basketball fans that they enjoy our telecast because we teach the game and we don't talk over their heads. And so the preparation that we do, I think our broadcasts are one of the better informed broadcasts in the NBA because Brevin's played the game. He has a great way of breaking down things, and hopefully I can throw out some numbers, not too many numbers, but enough to support and to tell a story as far as what's going on the floor.
You're on the board of the Making It Happen Foundation, which was founded by the Toohey family. What did they do?
What they've done is, I've rotated off that board at the present time, but basically they're just trying to provide opportunities for kids that are underserved. Obviously, Michael Orr and the whole Blindside movie, that was huge, and so they've tried to continue that effort to underserved communities, to underserved schools, in any way that they can.
How was it like to work with Sean Toohey?
It was a hoot. He's funny, he's witty, he's smart. Sometimes he plays this, I'm just an old country boy, and like, no, he's one of the sharpest people you'll ever meet in business, and certainly had a great basketball mind. It was intriguing to be with him, particularly in the early years of our partnership, because that's when the book that became The Blind Side basically germinated. We went out to lunch a lot. We were together a lot. And it's like, yeah, my friend Michael Lewis, he came over for a visit. And, he's who's that big kid over there? He's not your son. And so I would get all this information about how Michael Lewis was writing this book, and Sean couldn't understand why Michael Lewis wanted to write a book. And then, the movie rights have been auctioned, but they're never going to make a movie about this. And then the casting decisions, allegedly Julia Roberts, I think, was offered the role of Leanne Toohey. And then Sandra Bullock gets the role. And then you'd hear these stories about Sandra Bullock and Leanne Toohey, Sandra trying to learn what Leanne was all about. And there were a lot of great stories that came out of that. And what I would say about The Blind Side is people would say, that Sandra Bullock character, I know she won the Oscar, but that was so overplayed. Like, no, that's Leanne. And Sean was very thrilled that they chose Tim McGraw to portray him, because Tim McGraw is a handsome man, and Sean was very happy that they selected someone as handsome as Tim McGraw to portray him.
Lionel Hollins coached the Grizzlies from 2009 to 2013, and he did really extremely well here. I think Grizzlies had their first playoff win, the first playoff series victory, 3 straight playoff appearances, the Western Conference Finals in 2013. Why do you feel that despite all of that success, sometimes he doesn't get the credit for it?
That's a hard question to answer, because I think the people who are close to the organization, certainly recognize that. Lionel is very blunt, and he will tell you some things that you may not want to hear. And we also had a change in ownership too, and he had always been very close with Michael Heisley, and Mr. H sold the team, and so there were some changes. And like I said, Lionel would tell you exactly what he thought, and a lot of times maybe people didn't want to hear it. And then also the fact that he kept on with his coaching career and went other places. So, but I still think when you think of the core four, you always have a mention of Lionel Hollins in there, because he took a team that had been a fairly mediocre team, and you could see them on their upward trajectory because he demanded accountability. from players where, previous coaches had not. And, really took a team that was talented, but not really on the same page, and got them on the same page. And, it's the old school coaching. Lionel Hollins as a head coach now would not work. It was a different era. It was kind of a changing of the guard. But I honestly, I think Lionel is remembered fondly for what he did with the core four.
Besides calling NBA games and in the Olympics, you've had a very long broadcasting career. I believe, I don't know, 1979 when you were in high schools when it started.
Right.
You've called games for the NFL, NCAA, Memphis 901 FC, AAA baseball. Former Memphis Redbirds play-by-play voice Steve Selby once said about you, quote, "What you get with Pete is a consummate professional, and he's smooth in whatever he is covering." Why do you feel you're able to do what you do so well?
Well, number one, you have to love it. I think you have to approach it as a craft that you never master, but you're always working at it. You're trying to figure out ways to be better. Right now during the summer, I do a lot of Memphis 901 FC. Soccer is a sport that I came to later in life. And actually I came to it when I was working for Notre Dame, and both the men's and women's soccer coach said, "Hey, we'd like a PA announcer. You want to make a few extra bucks?" And that's how I came to soccer. And so, it's not something that I've been steeped in. I grew up watching the Green Bay Packers and the Milwaukee Brewers. So it's something that I've had to learn. But you dive into it and you want to be as good as you possibly can. My dad always said, if you're not going to be the best you possibly can be, why do you even bother? So that's something. How good can you be? I may never be Arlo White or John Champion, calling soccer matches, but I want to be the best I possibly can be, because it matters to somebody what the commentary is. I remember when I was a high school kid in Wisconsin, and I wrote to one of the local sports anchors, and I said, just give me some advice. And he said, one of his big things was make sure that you get the pronunciations right. The bigger point is there's somebody out there who cares enough to tune in. Therefore, you need to care enough to be correct, to be responsible, to give it your absolute best effort. And, when I was doing a lot of college soccer, SEC soccer, SEC volleyball, maybe it was just friends and family watching, but I wanted to make sure that the friends and family had the very best telecast and the very best experience, so that, they were like, "Hey, we videotaped this. We want to show our daughter playing soccer, volleyball, or whatever." And that they enjoyed the commentary, that I pronounced their daughter's name correctly, that I had the facts right, and could be entertaining and informative. So you just look at it as a craft, and you try to become better every single night. You try to find better ways to prepare. And I just enjoy that challenge. It's very, very stimulating, particularly to take on sports that are outside your wheelhouse. Baseball, basketball, football, that stuff's relatively easy. But then to get outside of your comfort zone, in the first Olympics, I'm doing team handball and judo, neither of which I'd ever seen before. So you're studying videotapes and you're talking to people, trying to learn about it. So it's an intellectual exercise that I find to be very engaging and a lot of fun.
You recently tweeted out a short video of a couple of kids I saw on your Twitter page. Of one of the kids was wanting to quit. They were playing rugby, and one of the kids was wanting to quit, and the other kid came over and gave him a ton of encouragement, told him how great he was, that they needed him. He was really great. And ultimately the young child, the other one that was going to quit, he decided to keep playing. You wrote above it, world needs a little more compassion. What did you mean by that? And what did that video mean to you?
I think the world needs a lot of compassion, because it seems that the world is increasingly more polarized on a lot of levels, right, without getting political. But it just seems that everybody is convinced that their viewpoint is right. And if you don't agree with me, you're wrong.
Right.
And I've always felt that there are a lot of shades of gray in life. Not everything is black and white. And so from that standpoint, I think compassion and understanding where the other person is coming from. And that's part of the communications training, because you're trying to meet your audience where they are. So there has to be that understanding. And I think just, I had a conversation with a very, very dear friend of mine, and, in her work world, she deals with people who can be very difficult in the corporate world. Why be difficult? It takes so much more effort in life to be antagonistic and angry and unhelpful. That takes effort.
Right.
It doesn't take effort to put your arm around somebody's shoulder and say, hey, better luck next time. You did your best. Kindness doesn't take a whole lot of effort. Being miserable, being difficult to deal with, that takes effort. Why, when you only have a limited amount of psychic energy, would you waste it on being mean to somebody? I just think compassion, I think kindness, it really is important, and it doesn't take a whole lot to encourage somebody. And I think the world needs more compassion. I think it needs more caring and more understanding. And so when I saw those two kids, it's one thing to hear it from an adult to a child,
Sure.
but to see a child be able to do that and say that to another child, that's like, wow, somebody taught that kid really well,
Right.
To do that. And I just think we need more of that, and we need less of the confrontation, and we need less of the people throwing tantrums in the midst of a grocery store, or yelling at a server because the order is wrong. The server didn't try to get the order wrong. They weren't doing it as a personal affront to you. They made a mistake, okay? And you sitting at the dinner table who got the wrong order probably made several mistakes during the course of the day. So just chill. Compassion, empathy, I think all of those things are hugely important, and I think we need more, certainly not less.
For several years, you've worked with mindfulness trainer Greg Graber. How have you taken what you've learned and implemented it in your career and your life?
Well, a lot of it is just remembering where you are in a given moment. It's easy when you get into the midst of 18,000 screaming fans and 10 players on the floor and coaches screaming and referees blowing whistles. It's very easy to get swept up in the emotionality of the game, because we try to present a pretty balanced commentary, but the bottom line is we want the Grizzlies to win.
Right.
And so there are a lot of times where you do have to take your breath, remember where you are, stay grounded, stay focused, don't get swept away. If there's what you feel is a bad call against the Grizzlies, you don't want to get swept in a wave of emotion. You want to take a deep breath. I think the other thing that is important in mindfulness is also a sense of gratitude. That's another thing that I think a lot of people might be missing, is that to be grateful for what you have rather than to be upset at what you don't have. And so I have a ritual before every game that before the red light comes on, I'm wearing the headset and we're ready to throw the ball up. You just take a deep breath, be mindful of where you are, and be grateful for where you are. There are only 30 jobs in the world like mine. And there are probably 30,000 people that would want this job.
Right.
And so you just have to be grateful for the organization that hired you, the production crew that's working with you, the opportunity to do something. I mean, look, I was 5 years old and I don't know if I used a soup can or whatever, or a comb or something to talk as a microphone. Look, I've wanted to do this since I was a little kid. And to have the opportunity to do it at the highest level, and this year was exceptional because I got to do my first NBA game on TNT, which was just an absolute bucket list item. Gratitude is very, very important. It's a part of mindfulness that you definitely don't want to forget and you don't want to give short shrift to.
Zach Randolph was drafted by Portland in 2001 when you were with the Trailblazers. And then when he came to the Grizzlies in 2009, he obviously was a very familiar face to you and you to him. His story, it's pretty amazing. Someone who made a lot of mistakes early on in his career, and then he turned it all around when he got to Memphis. What made Zach so special, and why do you think that Memphis embraced him with open arms?
I think Zach has always been a generous person. And I'm going to go to one of the, I'm going to say probably top 10 moments of my tenure in Memphis. Zach Randolph and I were doing a Read to Achieve event at a local school, grade school. And the child who read the most books in the given time period, their reward was they were going to interview Zach Randolph at an all-school assembly. So Zach Randolph and I, we do our program, and then the young man takes the microphone and he asks Zach Randolph, he said, what is the hardest thing for an African-American athlete? And Zach said, the people who say they're your friends and the people that you think might be your friends, they're not always your friends. And when Zach was drafted into Portland, he was drafted into a team that had some colorful characters, I think is the most diplomatic way to put it. It was the tail end of the Jailblazers era. Zach had gone from a single parent home where his mom struggled to keep the lights on, literally, to having millions and millions of dollars and a lot of friends and hangers on who felt that Zach owed them something. And so you had and Portland is a very different culture from Marion, Indiana, a very different culture from Memphis, Tennessee. And it was not a culture that it wasn't a fit for Zach. And, like I said, Zach had people around him that, there were guns, there were other things going on there that, were certainly on the wrong side of the law. And I give credit to Zach for the maturity that he showed. I give credit to Michael Heisley, who brought him here. And you go back and you look, and I always tease Jeff Calkins about this, the columnist for the Daily Memphian. So, you didn't think it was a very good idea. And he says, I know. I said, and I was wrong. But Michael Heisley said, look, Zach, I know your history. I've seen your history. If you act this way in Memphis, you're on the next bus out of town. And Zach took it to heart. And I think Zach's upbringing in Marion and his experience with the gritty, hardworking culture of Memphis, I think it was a great fit. The story about him paying MLGW bills, that wasn't something that was dreamed up by Grizzlies community relations. Zach said, I want to do something. He figured it out. And Zach is immensely loyal. When we would do events and I might want a picture with him or whatever, he would just say to everybody, he's like, y'all stand in line for a bit. Pete's my guy. Okay. He gets his picture first. I was like, it's okay. Yeah, I don't have to be first. And even I did a walk-off interview with him one time. I got my computer bag over my shoulder. He grabs the bag off my shoulder, gives it to our security guy and says, this is Pete's, watch this. So he's always looking out for me, and he's been super generous. And it was a tremendous honor to MC his jersey retirement ceremony, because I saw him as an immature, somewhat misguided kid. And to see him become a family man, to see him be beloved by the city where, Portland, they were going to chase him out. It's really a great story. And I think that, sometimes it's your environment. Sometimes it's just maturity. Sometimes it's just taking a lot of hard knocks. And I am so proud of Zach and what he has made of his life, considering the long journey he's had. And I love the guy. He's a friend, and I'm very thrilled to see where he has come from and where he is right now.
That's so awesome. Wrestling is obviously huge in Memphis. And as a kid, I went to the Mid-South Coliseum many times for Monday Night Wrestling. I saw Jerry Lawler wrestle Andy Kaufman. Uh, and I saw Bill Bundy, Hanson Jimmy Valiant, and many others. I know you're working with Memphis Wrestling with Dustin and Maria Starr that airs noon on Saturdays on CW30 here in Memphis. How did that come about for you?
Well, growing up, it was the AWA in Green Bay, and they would have shows at the Brown County Veterans Memorial Arena. So it was Billy Robinson and Nick Bockwinkel and the Crusher and the Bruiser. I think Dick the Bruiser actually had played for the Packers at one point. Baron von Raschke was, and there was some crossover. I think we got to see Jerry Lawler a little bit. And so I had a little bit of a history with it. I don't follow the WWE as religiously, as some. I've got a lot of other things on my plate right now, so that's just kind of fallen by the wayside. But Dustin being an in-arena host for the Grizzlies, I would always tease him a little bit, and I would tell him about, well, all these young wrestlers. Well, let me tell you about, the old guys. And so he's had conversation about it. And one of the things that was funny, my parents, they would have preferred that I be a lawyer or a priest. Those were the two preferred options, and struck out on both of those. And my mom said, well, if you're going to be a broadcaster, do me a favor. She said, there are two things I never want you to do as a broadcaster. She says, number one is never be a weatherman. Nobody likes the weatherman. And she said, never do pro wrestling. she just thought it would be beneath me. And so God rest her soul. But Dustin and I we just joke about it. And I said, look, you're doing these shows. I said, if you ever need commentary, if you ever want something, hey, I'll come out there, I'll help you. And so you have fun with it. And now I have pretty much every local pro wrestler as a friend on Facebook. And it's funny. They get a big kick out of it.
Right.
I mean, I'm doing it. It's fun. The crowds are great. Dustin has done an incredible job to get this thing off the ground, to get it on TV, and to make it so popular. But then for the wrestlers to react to me, the heels are taunting me about, well, they're from California, from the Golden State, the Grizzlies aren't any good. And, so you get some of that good natured teasing, but then to see the wrestlers like, oh my God, Pete's here. The voice of the Grizzlies is doing our matches. This is pretty cool. It's kind of a weird, but it's fun to do those tapings and to see the athleticism, and it's been fun. And Dustin and Maria are great people. And like I said, I cannot congratulate or salute Dustin enough for what he has done to revitalize Memphis wrestling.
One of my favorite quotes from a movie is from Clint Eastwood in Heartbreak Ridge, where he says, improvise, adapt, overcome. That's something that you and Brevin had to do when calling games after COVID started. How were you guys able to do that so well, despite all the obstacles?
I think part of it is I had a lot of experience with calling things off tube. When I actually off monitor, showing my age, because when I did the Olympics in Athens, it was off a monitor. I was in the International Broadcast Center. I wasn't actually at the venue. When I called the Olympics in 2008, I wasn't even in the country. I was in New York City in a soundproof booth on the stage of Saturday Night Live calling weightlifting off a high definition feed on a monitor. So that wasn't as much of an issue for me. I was used to it. You just had to be a little bit more careful. You couldn't speculate on things because, when you're sitting courtside, and if you need clarification from a referee, you can call them over. They know us and they respect us. That, hey, can you tell me that rule? Why that was what that was? And they can explain it. There were times where if we're broadcasting remotely and they go to a review and they weren't using a microphone to announce to the arena what they're reviewing, sometimes like, I don't know what happened there, and so you would have to guess. The thing that you miss too is a lot of our pregame preparation is talking to the other broadcasters. Tell me about this guy. What about this guy's nagging injury? Or assistant coaches. There are a number of players that I've called their games that they're now assistant coaches. And I can chat with them and say, hey, tell me a little bit about this guy. You couldn't do that because we remained in Memphis. And so you could be good at calling the action. You could be good at breaking down what you saw, but there were a lot of things that you couldn't see. And I think for a lot of people in the audience, they didn't notice a huge difference, but we noticed a massive difference. We could not be as good as we wanted to be because we didn't have access to information on a lot of levels. And that was what was really, really tough for us to deal with.
What was it like going to Japan last year to train Japanese broadcasters to call NBA games?
That was an incredible experience. Just the opportunity to go, number one, and then to try to create a curriculum where over the course of a couple of days, you could work with these broadcasters, many of whom they may know soccer, they may know baseball, but there were only like 2 or 3 that had done NBA games and had done them off monitors. Some had, had been to the NBA finals. So it's like, okay, what am I teaching you? Am I teaching, the rules, which I did spend a lot of time on officiating and rules, because those are things that are really hard to deal with if you're watching games off monitors. I talked about various points of strategy. I played a quarter of a game between the Grizzlies and Houston where we had flagrant fouls, we had technical fouls, we had a lot of different things. So, you're gonna roll it here. Okay, stop this. I want to point this out. I want to point that out. The challenge is that the Japanese culture is all about respect and politeness. And you would ask for questions. Okay, what can I tell you? I think I'm doing a good job. At least I hope I'm doing a good job of trying to give you this information. Please ask me questions. In the Japanese culture, for them to ask a question of someone who is presenting, it borders on the disrespectful. Right. So I had to. So finally, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you a question, and you are going to answer a question. Who's your favorite NBA player? Past or present. So you try to engage them in conversation. But it was great fun to experience a different culture. They were very rabid about the NBA, and thankfully I had a wonderful interpreter, Reo Onishi, who actually translates a number of NBA related books into Japanese. He had just finished working with, I think, Dwayne Wade on his autobiography and translating that into Japanese. And so it was great fun. And in fact, we had, because the trip to Japan was pre-COVID, so it might've been like 2019, I think. There was actually some of these commentators then came to Memphis to see a game in person. And that was great fun as well. It was one of those experiences that I'd never been to Asia before. And it was a very special experience and one that you'll never get again.
I know you're an avid golfer and you're also an amateur aviator. I recently saw that you flew in a B-17. That had to be really, really cool. What are you better at, golf or flying?
I'm average at both, probably. Yesterday I played with Brevin. I might have been one of the worst rounds of golf I've played, but in fairness, it was at TPC Southwind and it's set up for the pros right now, so that might have had something to do with it. Flying, you really need to, you need to build more and more hours. Can you get the plane on the ground safely? Yes. Can you do it gently? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So yeah, I'm pretty average at both. Wish I had more time to devote to those things, but they're great diversions. Flying is the ultimate multitasking, and it is a little jarring when you're the only person in the plane. You got to get it on the ground safely, and you got your own hide on the line, and that can be rather intimidating. But it's great for focus. It's great for staying in the moment, because if you don't stay in the moment, and I even talked to Greg about this, like if you don't stay in the moment in the cockpit, you're in real trouble. And so mindfulness in the cockpit is huge.
What are the most important lessons that you've learned in life?
Things are never as good as they seem or as bad as they seem, but reality falls somewhere in between. I think that's one of the top life lessons. And I think also the ability to take a step back and to evaluate the situation and look at it from a realistic perspective. You had talked about the Clint Eastwood line, and one of the lines that always resonates with me is Apollo 13. This didn't really happen. It was dramatized in the movie, but when Jim Lovell says, we're not going to go bouncing around here, bouncing around the walls for 5 minutes, and we'll be right back in the exact same problem we were 5 minutes ago. We're not going to do this. It didn't really happen, but it was just an example of, you have an issue, you have a crisis. Running around, screaming, pounding on the walls is not going to solve that crisis. Something bad happens to you. Okay, let's take a deep breath. What are the options? What's the impact on me right now? How do I fix this? How do I make this better? Rather than just running around in circles, being angry or upset, because anger doesn't help anything. I think that's another major life lesson. Being angry does not solve anything. You want to vent? Okay, fine. Go vent, then fix the problem.
Pete, how can people find you online?
I am on Twitter at Pete Pranica. Just that simple. You referenced the podcast, Grizz Weekly Grind. You can find it at HoopsPodNet. Probably down to once a week during the summer, but you can find it at HoopsPodNet. Also, anywhere you get your podcast, Grizz Weekly Grind. It's there everywhere. So those would be the places to find me. I'm also on Instagram too, and that's at Pete Pranica too. No crazy handles, just straightforward stuff.
Pete, I really, really appreciate you coming on today on the show. It's been an honor to be able to talk to you today. So I thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate the good research and preparation and questions that you had for me today. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I hope to maybe have you on again sometime down the road.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.